Hi everybody, it's Warren Huart here. Hope you're doing marvelously well. I'm sitting here with the great Howard Willing. He and I have a lot of friends in common. We've actually just been chatting off camera about that. One of those, of course, is the great Tim Pierce, who is inarguably, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest session guitar player around. Probably the most adaptable guitarist I've ever worked with. And the fact that he's got guys like you and me, and we're just talking about Rob Cavallo and Matt Soletic, you know, the list of all these producers he's worked with who've probably beaten him to pieces, you know. So now when you hire him, you get like the right idea almost immediately, if not immediately. So, and he's a great resource for guys like you and I, because he just makes our life easier, makes us look good, doesn't he?
He makes us look unbelievable.
So are you originally from Memphis? Is that right? Or you moved to Memphis?
I'm originally from Long Island.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so I'm once a New Yorker, always a New Yorker, but from New York.
So then did you go to Memphis immediately? What was your journey?
Then I moved to Florida, did a little bit of college down there, and then from there went to, my first studio gig was in Memphis.
Great.
It became House of Blues, but it was called Kiva at the time. And I worked for Gary Bells there for about a year and a half. And it was fantastic. The jumping off point for me, it was like just going, you know, from going 0 to 100, you know, like that. It was crazy.
Sure. That's fantastic. So Memphis. So now you told me you went from Memphis straight to LA. What was the transition from that?
Well, basically Gary has a place in Encino that you've probably been to, House of Blues up there.
I still haven't been to it. So tell me a little bit before we move to the Encino one. So tell me a little bit about the Memphis studio. Was this a Pro Tools, a tape? What kind of?
Oh, this is back in the ancient days. It was like 90, 91.
Great.
Giant SSL. They had it was all tape, and they had an MCI 32 track. Remember those?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, one of those. They had this funky, I want to say it was a Western console in the other room, but all the R&B guys, because they did quite a bit of like R&B there, they all loved that particular board. And I remember, and his name is escaping me, but it's the guy that engineered the sessions for Shaft.
Huh.
Unbelievable R&B engineer. Loved the board. And he was like one of my first times I ever assisted was for him, and I can't remember his name. I just remember him always saying that bass guitar 1.5K, just crank the hell out of it.
Nice.
For R&B, and that was kind of his thing. But I mean, I got to learn from guys like Jim Gaines.
Oh yeah, I worked with Jim 2000. He flew out to do an album for a soap star that wanted to do country, and the guitar player, Elvis's guitar player, played on it. It's one of those moments in my life. I've never worked with a guitar player with an ear like this guy. So he comes out, played with Jerry Lee Lewis. I saw him with Jerry Lee Lewis in like '98 at Hootenanny. And he played with Elvis. He has the Paisley Telly. And I remember Jim was like the producer, but it was very old school. So sitting in the back of the room going, yeah, sounds great.
Yeah. That's exactly what he would do.
Yeah.
I always thought he wasn't doing it, you know, because I was young. I didn't know anything. I just thought, you know, this guy in the back, he's not doing it. He just sits there and goes, just shakes his head or does this, and you're just kind of like, this guy could do Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yeah.
You know, all these great artists. But he was amazing. He could hear things that, you know, you just didn't. Right. At least at the time, I didn't hear. You know. Right,
which I think goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how a lot of YouTube videos are always focused on the technical stuff, and it's important to know the technical stuff. But I've sort of acquired it as I've gone on, but the most important thing is the song and the music and the creativity, and you know.
Well, you and Rob alluded to that in his video of just like the Beck thing was recorded on nothing.
Yeah, right? An E8 and a Roland hard disk recorder. Remember those ugly gray hard disk recorders?
No, it doesn't matter. It's the song. Yeah. I mean, as much as we want to be narcissistic about what we do.
Of course.
We don't matter as much as we think we do.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, Dave. Dave Jordan, I've said this 1,000 times, so the viewers will probably switch off from this comment, but Dave Jordan said to me, sometimes you've got to go in there, change the key of the song, change the arrangement, rewrite the chorus, change the bridge, change everything about it. And other times you just got to get out of the way of the band and help them make a great recording.
Exactly.
And the skill is knowing that. And I think one of the problems with the technology for us, one of the advantages of the technology is you can do anything. And one of the problems is that when you get tied into using it on a technical level, is that you forget that a great performance will beat any tightening, tuning, whatever. You know, if I, you know what I'm saying? If you throw a mic up and...
Absolutely. I'm sure you get sessions from younger guys all the time where they hand you these sessions and there's, you know, a dozen plugins on the vocal. There's, you know, just all this crazy crap they're doing, and you take it all off and you just do the one compressor, the one thing,
sure,
and they get stuff back and they're like, what did you do? It's like, well, I took off all the stuff that you were doing.
Yeah, it's tough. I agree. One of the things I've been really over the last, especially since AES and NAMM this year, and seeing all the different types of gear and plugins are coming out. One of the things I'm starting to really realize, and I'm going to ask you about your setup because obviously I want to know what you're doing. I'm seeing summing really starting to disappear as even an option anymore. As much as I love my beautiful 4000 sitting behind me, and I have a CADAC as well and a BCM10, I think that, you know, when you talk to guys like Neil Avron and Andrew Shepp, especially Andrew, who mixed a very organic sounding records, it really comes down to the front end. If I'm using a nice mic through a mic pre with a couple of transformers in it, why do I need to spend $3,000 on a summing box with 2 to 4 transformers in it when I've already used that? I think is gone. I think summing amps are, I mean, you know, I don't know what your opinion is, but I feel like if it's recorded well.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it, I go back and forth.
Of course.
I have to be honest with you. I tend to mix entirely in the box, except my stereo bus kind of goes out to a few things. I mean, I'll send stuff out, you know, as I need, and then bring it back in. But I think the idea of actually breaking everything out is kind of going away. And with the introduction of stuff like what Steven Slade is doing with like his Raven thing, you know, you basically have your console there. I mean, I personally don't hear that much of a sonic uptick when things are broken out to warrant doing it.
Yeah.
The cost of it, I should say.
I agree. Steve Jackson and I, you know, Steve Jackson from Pultec and I were talking last night. He was chatting with me and we were looking at, he wants to buy a console, and I'm like, well, what do you want it for? Because I think for front end, I get it. But to mix in a modern way and make it sound modern, you know, my old Neve, I ended up like only using a couple of channels because the more I broke it out through the Neve, it actually stopped me from getting what I needed to get. Now, if I was doing a purely organic, massively open, incredibly dynamic sounding song, then the Neve would have been perfect. But for everything else, I didn't like the bus slamming. I didn't like hearing all that, because what was happening on a Neve is it's not pleasant when you slam a Neve like this. An SSL, you get away with the things just peaking, as you know. You can it almost limits and helps you. That's what's great about an SSL. But with a Neve, a piano on a Neve that goes into the red is like, it's, ugh.
Yeah.
So I'm like, if you're going to buy the console for front end, I get it. But if it's for mixing these days and you want to mix modern music, I actually end up starting to use less channels and doing more in the box. And like you're saying, I haven't moved just to stereo yet, but I'm moving to like pairs of things, you know.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, exactly. I just did this, the last Pumpkins record. We had David Bottrell.
Oh, Dave Bottrell, yeah.
Bottrell, however you say it.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the English way. Who knows what's right?
He came in and, you know, mixed the record, and we had it broken out through. Billy has this giant Helios desk, and
lovely.
Yeah, it actually is.
Did you track through it?
We tracked mostly through Neves.
Right.
I mean, Billy's setup. I mean, we can talk about this later if you want to, but Billy.
No, people. This is Billy Corgan, but for those that don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Billy has more gear than anybody. It's insanity. Like guys like you and I we would go. I walked in the first time. I was like, oh, it was like a kid in a candy store.
Yeah.
There's an EMI console. There's a Neve console. There's Helios desks. There's an Electrodyne console. It's just like insanity. So the palette that you, it's just amazing.
I think that's a rock star thing. When I was in the Boneyard with Aerosmith, Joe Perry's studio, it's like what you want. You go in and it's like, oh, there's an 8038. You're like, really? And then like, you're like, every compressor you've ever wanted to use, there's two of, and every mic and every guitar and every amp. And I think that it's a combination when you get, because there's a lot of rock stars that have a lot of gear that don't have taste, but obviously sounds like Billy has taste and Joe has incredible taste, so they know the right things to get, you know.
Exactly, and that's another key point. Goes back to a bit to what you were saying about summing and buying stuff. Is like I feel like a lot of people just don't know the correct like there's a reason why Neves work.
Yep.
And there's a reason why APIs still work.
Yep.
And the reinvention of it, I don't know how to say, but you know, there's just not, there's a lot of kids just don't know to get the, like you said, get the proper front end, get the proper mic. Maybe you don't use any compression, especially if you're using a vocal or something like that going in.
Yeah.
You know, so that you can treat things on the back end, especially with digital, the way digital is, you can change your timbres as much as you want.
I think we have an advantage, though, because we've been doing this quote-unquote long time. We have an advantage because we can either compress on the way in and do it the right amount in the right way, or we can mix it pretty dry without. One of the things I think for a lot of kids or people starting up now is I'm trying to help them because they're printing really thin, weedy tones, and then, as you say, they have to use 12 plugins, at least in their mind, to get it to sound as good. And I think it's really tough. You're right. API, Neve, they're these kind of like untouchable things because they're consistent, and most things are clones of those. I will say, I don't want to ever sound like a gear slut snob kind of guy, but I will say that buying a cheap version of those could be kind of counterproductive because it's almost like some of those $400 mic pre's don't sound any better than the ones that are inside your $400 interface.
Exactly, and that's basically what I was trying to say. It's like you spend the money up front and you get the reward is greater on the back end.
Yeah.
It's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, maybe, I feel like if you had one nice mic pre, and I think you can get entry about $1,000 for a 1073.
Sure.
I know that the BAE one, that DMP, is about $1,000, and it's no EQ, so that's an entry level. One nice condenser, which I think mid-price, $500-600, and a 57, and you're probably making records.
Absolutely.
Great. Yeah.
Absolutely. Although I would probably change my 57 to. I've become a slut for those Biodynamic M160s.
Oh, I love those mics.
I've just started using them on I love them. They're amazing microphones.
Oh wow! No, I've loved.
$800.
You didn't find that in England though, because we love Bios in.
Oh, well, at the time I was into Royers, and I still am. But you know, I was a Royer guy, and you know, I just liked using those things. But I literally coming to Nashville just found out about those microphones.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. No, I love those. I think mine died recently, and it was always my mono drum mic, and I just used to point it down at the kit, and it just was magic.
Yeah,
it got
that's a very English thing, isn't that? That because when I worked with Flood, his whole thing was it was a 58, and through an ADL. And just his custom ADL though, but he would crush the living crap out of it.
Yeah, it's great. And
it's an amazing sound.
Did you notice a lot of guys don't even put a hi-hat mic up?
Yeah, well, why? Cymbals are the worst instrument ever created.
Drummer, leave comments here.
I used to make, when I used to do records, I always tried to make the drummer play without cymbals.
Yeah.
And then overdub them, just because I hated that I couldn't sculpt that sound into something that, you know, really that I wanted.
I mean, it could a drummer that doesn't have a proper balance, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but a drummer doesn't have a proper balance just can destroy any room mics with just cymbals. That you're trying to get boom, ka, da boom, boom, and you just get shh. As soon as you turn your rooms up. The only thing I find with that, I'm sure you do the same thing, is I'll distort my room mics, and that will eat up the top end quite a lot. So that's a good trick I've found to try and bring kick and snare out of it, just a little overdrive.
I use I have a Level Loc over there.
Oh, of course, those are great.
And I use that as my mono room, you know, kind of back a bit, and that thing just destroys everything.
Yeah, and that's fantastic.
Such a great sound.
Yeah, it's funny in England when I moved here, I'd only mic'd the hi-hat a couple of times. But what we used to do is we had a bass cabinet, and we put a PZM on the bass cabinet and pushed the bass cabinet up against the hi-hat, and that was our hi-hat mic.
Really?
Yep, try it. It sounds really good.
I may try that.
Yeah, it's really good. I think I got that from Andy Thurnback, you know, who's Dave Gilmour's.
Where do you place it though?
Just so here's your hi-hat.
Yeah.
Just put your PZN up on a bass cabinet, push it up to it's like there. Simple as that.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so you have the surface of a bass cabinet. I got that from Andy. Andy's Dave Gilmour's engineer. That's how they were doing Floyd stuff, Pink Floyd stuff. So I was like, hey, if it's good. He's the guy. He used to come in with just a pair of 87s, a 57, that trick, and a D12, and that was the drum sound.
I hate the English. Because it's 3 microphones and it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, he used 4, you see. So.
Fair enough.
And a PZM, so 5. But yeah, it was. Well, but you know, that was also when we were kids. You know, albums that were coming out in the 80s, especially the English ones. I mean, everything was just lexicons. Everything was just drowned with verb, and especially it's all about Flood. I mean, Flood's early stuff is just like, wow. When he worked with Curve, his wife, Tony Halliday's Halliday's band, it's just like, yeah, it's just like ambience and delays and verb and stuff like that. You know.
Yeah, and when I worked with him, he was still doing. Like he's kind of a master at that kind of texture.
Yeah,
it's really kind of it's quite something to behold, I have to say.
Wait, is that Flood's wife or Alan Moulder's wife?
It's Alan's.
Alan's wife is Tony. Sorry.
Flood. Who's I forget Flood's wife's name. But yeah, that's Alan's.
Alan's wife. That's it. Yeah. Sorry, Alan. Sorry, Flood. I don't want to start any rumors. Anyway.
You're screwing up everybody in the industry today.
Yeah, we are. This is the inside look of her. So let's get back to it. So Memphis. Now you said you went to work at the House of Blues studio in LA.
Right. So I got Andy. Gary moved me out to LA, and I ended up working up at the house. It used to be Tito Jackson's old place.
That was it. Yep.
So it's a fantastic place to record because it's up on the hill. It's overlooking the valley. It's nobody's near you. It's just a gorgeous space. And at the time, he had the Power Stations API, the one that was in their mobile truck. He had the Power Stations API in there. Tons of great gear. You know, at the time it was all, he had an MCI and a couple of Studers.
Great.
And it was a great learning experience because I was basically the engineer, I was the assistant, I was the runner, I was the tech. And no joke, I used to have to watch the kids sometimes.
Let's just say a few guys who work for me have done all those jobs too. Once you have kids, you'll probably end up having the guys who work for you do the same thing. Do you know Jamie Neely? Do you know Jamie Neely?
Oh my God.
Yeah, he was Rob Cavallo's guy for a long time.
Yeah, no, Jamie's great.
He's a great guy. He basically was all of those things too. I think he was like the assistant engineer, picked up the kids, assistant, everything. Now he's like doing really, really well. I can't remember which publishing company he is at now, but now he's doing great in publishing. And so
he was a great guy. Yeah.
I think it's a good lesson on a sort of an indirect way. It's that lesson in humility. It's like you have to kind of. It's tough because I get a lot of guys come through here, and the guys I got at the moment are all fantastic. But I've had so many guys come through that are pretty much like, why am I not producing top 40 albums? I've been doing this 3 months.
I I say that all the time to myself.
Yeah, exactly. You and me both.
It's just, I think if that's, the biggest thing with those kids is that I think it's hard when they spend 50 to 70 grand now to go to these schools, and they come out and they have to get me coffee. They have to set up. They're wrapping cables at Ocean Way, or they don't. Yeah. It's hard to understand that. Like, if you and I hadn't done all of that stuff, I don't know what would have happened. I just don't think I would appreciate what I do as much.
No, I agree. I'm the same way. I was the everything guy, so I know that job, and I didn't go to school. I was a musician. Well, so I had no schooling.
You were the smart one then.
I don't know about the smart one, but but I was working in studios that I built with friends, and home studios from 18, 19 up.
Right.
So, and then sort of balancing it all, and then we get like the occasional good session. I remember Louise Goffin came through, who ended up being my neighbor and a good friend of mine. Louise came through, and she had Gerlan Dorsey was her bass player. This is like 90, and I remember just suddenly I'm like in a room with like these monster players, like recording them, and it's there's sort of little things where you get little glimpses into what the real world is like and how you can, and you either embrace it and learn from it and become humble, or you blow it, and I see quite a lot of more people blow it than embrace it.
Yeah, or they shine bright for a minute and then they buy into their own thing.
Yeah.
Then they blow it.
Yeah, I think one of the lessons, and I've been reading a lot of different stuff from different people over the years, I'm sure you do as well. One of the things I've found is that we just have to learn to be adaptable. There's no lottery ticket in life. It's not like you're gonna do a record, it becomes like a massive 5 times platinum album, and then that's it. You're gonna make $10 million a year for the rest of your life. I don't know if that world ever existed, or maybe it did for a couple of guys. But even like when you had Babyface ruling the charts for 5 years,
right,
it doesn't mean that he's always going to get every album now. And I'm not being disrespectful, because those guys are unbelievably talented. I always like that saying, what is it? It takes you 20 years to become an overnight success.
I agree with that. The only one that I think has been able to do that at that level has been Max Martin. I mean, that guy
since the early 2000s,
yeah. But even a bit before that, I mean, he's unstoppable. Yeah,
I think. Well, the lesson from Max and a lot of those kind of big writers underneath him is that they all very quickly get into the idea of understanding, okay, I have a lot of money I've made from publishing, now let's have a publishing empire. So now they start signing writers and artists underneath them who are also co-writing the songs, and they become like these moguls. Max Martin is not just a great songwriter and producer, he's a music business mogul.
Right.
I don't know how many people he publishes, but I'm sure it's quite a few, and they're all talented writers and producers in their own right. And I think that's part of the adaptation. Like, we get into this business, we adapt and we roll with the punches, and but it's probably always been like that, but it's even more like that in our business now, definitely. But let's get to Nashville, because I want to know a little bit about your setup, and I'm sure everybody wants to know what you've got, and I see some cool pieces around there.
Well, I have what is known as a bonus room here in Nashville, and I just kind of I haven't been able to actually outfit it the way I want to, because I just bought this house.
Great.
So I've only been in this house for a couple of months.
Is that a Space Echo behind you? What is that over there?
That?
Yeah.
It's actually a Japanese knockoff.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, and it's just weird and funky, and it distorts weird.
Great. What's it called?
I think it's called Analog Echo. It's called the Sound Effects Box.
Wow, and it's tape?
It's tape. It's from the 70s.
Oh, wow. Analog Echo Sound Effects Box. Oh, I like that.
I got it. Do you remember Vintage? Is it Vintage Gear? It was on Hollywood, right next to Guitar Center. I don't know if he's still there anymore. It was John Nelson.
Was it on the corner?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's being. You know what? I was with Dave Weideman last week. I had lunch with him, and we walked past it, and it's now being turned into a cafe. It's gone. It's a cafe now.
Yeah. but I got that. I got a couple, like the pedals and stuff that I have. I all got basically from him.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I know when they were sort of, I don't know if they were going out of business, but I know they were selling amps so cheap there. And I took one of the guys from the Fray in there, and he picked up a couple of like Fender Deluxes for like half price.
Oh God, yeah. I think he moved everything up to online and discovered the storefront. But yeah, so I mean, Space Echo. I mean, I have. I don't know. I mean, I have stuff like this, an original Spectrasonics.
Oh, fantastic!
Here, I love I have a Chandler Zener.
Remember with the Spectrasonics, remember what Rob says, don't try to use cleaning fluid on it.
No. Yeah, because you just screw that sucker up.
Yeah, he put cleaning fluid on it and the whole of his VU plate just goes cloudy white.
Yeah,
so what's the Chandler, sorry? The Chandler Zenith, what's that?
The Zener diode, they're
Zener.
kind of road-ish compressor.
Yeah.
I use that a lot for just the saturation side of it, more so than the compression side of it. That's part of my stereo bus chain.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. I do kind of the thing that, is it the rolls? There's that one passive summing box that we were when we were talking about summing boxes. There's one that's passive and it breaks it out. It drops the level down 36 dB or so.
Wow.
But I do the same thing. I just do it off the stereo bus. I just drop my stereo bus down about 36 dB. I make it up through a pair of Uri tube pre's. And then I go into a C1 and then into the Chandler.
Wow.
So I get kind of that analog. I get a tube. I get kind of the SSL-ish kind of thing with the C1.
Sure. And you get a lot of transformers.
Yeah. And then just back into Pro Tools and print it that way.
That's a nice tip. We'll have to make sure to put that on the list there.
You just have to be careful because like I have a trim, like my stereo bus is normal, but if you have to make sure you put a trim thing in at the front and pull it down.
Sure.
About 36 dB is what I make up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So have you found that otherwise you're just overdriving it far too hard? Is anything less than that? Anything more than that?
You don't get any of the saturation of the mic pre.
Right. Oh, so I see.
That's what I'm using it for, is to kind of get the tube kind of drive.
Right. I see.
From it. When I get some money though, I'm gonna swap it out because Chandler has those red preamps. Have you used those?
I haven't yet.
They're amazing.
Are they?
And back to Billy actually has an original. I think he has a pair of the originals, and it's pretty identical to the originals. So I'm going to get a pair of those because they've got that British thing about them. Just that kind of spongy kind of, I don't know. It's dark, it's spongy, it's everything I like.
It's funny, growing up in England, obviously, most of my favorite bands were English to a certain extent, but I was obsessed with New York 70s. Like, to me, that was, because in New York in the 70s and the late 60s, you had, from the Velvet Underground in the late 60s, you had Patti Smith, you had all the English bands and John Lennon going over to New York and recording, you had early Alice Cooper, and it was this sort of like record plant, kind of Bob Ezrin, Jack Douglas, Jay Messina, Roy Cicala, Shelley Yakos. Yep. If you listen, so it's funny, like growing up in England, I was obsessed with Spectrasonics, the Data Mix, those consoles.
Those things are amazing.
I know. I interviewed Shelley last week, and he called them the upright pianos because they go like this. They look like an upright piano.
And that was the Hendrix sound, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was designed by Roy Cicala and Shelley probably together. So they were all part of it. It's going back to like Trident consoles. They were the engineers with the techs going, this is what we want. This is how we want it to sound. These are the features we need. Right. Just when everything was like one business,
Well, that was also at the time when if you were an engineer, you were actually an engineer.
Yeah.
You like Eric Valentine, that guy's that guy's an engineer. He builds his own gear.
That's amazing.
He makes his own consoles, the whole thing, and makes amazing records as well.
Yeah.
You know.
That's a thing of the past. That's the way it used to be. Yeah.
It used to be, yeah.
Yeah. Talking to Shelley is like that because Shelley's very technical as well, and he grew up in the business because his dad was a well-known songwriter, and they had a studio, and I think, yeah, a whole bunch of them with Roy Cicala basically ran those studios, and all those guys. Jimmy Iovine came out of that. Donnie Ienner, you know, Jack, and it's a wealth of just talent pool. But anyway, so I looked at all those records, and every time I'd turn over an album, I would see Record Plant and Bob Ezrin, or, you know, listening to The Wall as a kid by Pink Floyd. It was just, I just saw all these American names. So even though I grew up loving British bands, it always seemed to come back to where you're from, New York. Everything, that seemed to be the center. And you know what I mean? It was like that was, so it's funny that I'm obsessed about New York, but over in America, everybody wanted to be English.
And I rightly so. I mean, the records, especially the stuff in the '80s, and like all that Joy Division.
Oh, I love Joy Division. Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
There's just like all of that kind of that new wave kind of post-punk kind of stuff.
But we all stole it from the Velvet Underground, Iggy Pop. That's what we were obsessed with.
Right.
Like when I met Peter Murphy and worked with him a few years ago, he told me that they stayed in the Chelsea Hotel in like 1979 or whatever it was, just so they could meet Iggy.
That's crazy.
So we're all obsessed with Iggy and the Velvet Underground and, you know, Patti Smith, like Easter and Horses and Radio Ethiopia. Those were like massive records for us as kids.
Yeah.
And that's where you get Joy Division from. You get it from the New York kind of punk scene. And you guys, you had the Ramones, you had Talking Heads, you had Television, you had Blondie. So we all wanted to be that.
It was a great time for me.
Amazing time.
It was an amazing time.
Yeah.
I was so lucky to have grown up then.
We are really lucky because I feel like, and I don't. It's almost becoming a theme of my last few videos, you know, with Rob as well. I almost feel like having that 70s through early 80s thing, it was a sort of all bets are off. You just made a record with great songs on it. And maybe one of the songs was a disco song. Maybe one of the songs was kind of punk. Maybe it was full rock. Maybe it was, but nobody cared. You just made great records. There wasn't this sort of idea of like, well, you know, it has to be this. Or nowadays, if you turn in a great eclectic record, the label will look at you and go, what's the genre? No, well, the genre is great songs.
Yeah, it's not focused enough.
Yeah.
What format do we go to? And that's the thing that kind of killed. That's the thing that killed music more than anything, more than, you know, record companies. Was what was it? '96 with the Telecommunications Act, when basically Clear Channel went from something like 17 stations to like 1,000 overnight, wow. And then they screwed the industry because, I mean, you must remember, you know, any FM station you would put on, and it would be like. I mean, BBC is still kind of like this, where, you know, you would have Bowie, and then you'd have the Fray, and then you'd have, you know, whatever the Kendrick Lamar, all on the same station at this, you know, and now, like, I put on alternative radio here, and it's like listening to the 1990s.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, K-Rock in LA, I'm no disrespect to K-Rock, but when I landed in 95, end of 95, early 96, they were playing Weezer, who we all love, Presidents of the United States of America, and now they play Weezer and Presidents of the United States of America.
And there's nothing bad about that.
Nothing bad, but yeah.
It's just that it's boring.
Well, I also feel like, without getting off too much of a tangent, but I also feel like one of the advantages of Europe, and I'm not just going to say it's England as well, because obviously Sweden, and then if you go outside of Europe, Australia and New Zealand, the reason why we see so much innovation coming from those countries is also, frankly, is the fact that there's less business people involved.
Yeah.
Over here, you produce an artist, you bring it to a label, and the A&R guy goes, I really like that. My friend, blah, 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 will produce it. You do that in England, they go, wow, let's put it out.
Right. And also, it's a lot of people in a smaller area.
Yeah.
So it kind of can get around quicker as well.
Exactly,
so it can catch on fire easier.
Yeah. Well, and also, talking of BBC Radio 1, like you're saying, they have to play very eclectic sorts of music because it's a national station. I remember when I was in a band, we got played on drive time, which was between 5 and 7 p.m. on a weeknight, and it was a huge deal for us. We actually charted in 1 week from one spin. We got to number 27 in 1 week off this one spin. And I was like, wow, why is that, to my manager? And my manager said, 16 million people heard your song.
Right.
You can't do that in America because K-Rock might be a huge independent radio station, and they're a great radio station, but they might have 300,000 people listening. Yeah. The biggest stations in America have hundreds of thousands, maybe a million. But if you go to Europe and you go to just France, I don't know what the national radio station in France is, but whatever the national pop station is, when they play a song, millions of people hear it. So just to your point entirely, it's very easy to, if something's good, it gets grabbed on immediately. Yeah.
Goes quick, yeah.
And I think music in England is a lot more youth-driven than it is over here.
I agree 100% with that.
It's got a lot to do with, not that I agree with it, but it's got a lot to do with the drinking age, because you can go out at 18 and go to a bar, you know what I mean, and play shows at 18.
We should, legislation right now to lower the
I'm actually not a big fan. I actually prefer the old, having kids. I'm sure. Actually more, I'm quite happy to have them not drink. But that's a whole other discussion. But anyway, I love our tangents. Probably all my fault. I think we. So the Chandler, I love that bus setup. That's fantastic. I'm seeing what I think in our pixelated Skype world. I'm seeing a couple of Manleys down there.
I have a pair of the old kind of Pultec Manleys.
Those are great.
I have an Orville, an Eventide Orville, that was given to me by Flood.
Oh wow.
Flood gave me that.
That's fantastic.
I don't know if you can see them in the shop, but I have a pair of Neumann EQs.
No, but are those old mastering EQs?
Exactly. So.
Oh, dude.
Our mutual friend Rob Schnapp, who, and I'll say this right now, I think is one of the best engineers I've ever worked with. He's an amazing engineer. And we're still friends, and I'll hit him up on Facebook all the time. And what do you think about this, or what do you think about that? And he gives great, honest answers about things. So he turned me on to. I got a couple of things from the 70s from these mastering things in I guess it would be West Germany. Over here I have the Filtek EQs. Filtek, and right. They're great. They sound amazing. Again, out of a mastering board. He also turned me on to these Siemens EQs, which are basically Pultecs, but they're affordable Pultecs for people that want to spend $3,500 for one.
We'll see if we can find photographs of these to put up as you're saying them, because I love this stuff.
They're amazing sounding. They're creamy. They're just lots of nice low end. Is that
an Ampex above?
This.
Yeah.
It's actually an amp.
It is.
Yeah, it's called a Klemt Echolette.
Oh wow.
It's a German amplifier, but it's the amp that the Beatles, when they would travel, it's the amp that they used when they went to Germany, because you could plug 4 instruments into it and then blend them. But it's great. It's kind of plexi-ish, but a bit more blown out in the low end.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And what's above it?
That's the Level Loc.
Oh, it's the Level Loc. Sorry, yeah, you pointed it earlier.
That's the Level Loc. And then I just have a bunch of pedals and
is that a Uri 610 or something underneath the cat?
Yeah, that's all. She's always here. That's what I use to make up my stereo bus.
Oh, I see. Oh, right. Sorry, I missed that part of it. I apologize. I've got a little story with I may have said it before, Bob Ludwig. When I mastered with him a few years ago, the first time I ever worked with him, I'm a huge Zappa fan. I think anybody that works in music is a huge Zappa fan for so many things. A lot to do with the fact that, he pushed all the boundaries in production, like did some insane stuff. And Shake Your Booty is one of my favorite records. It's just so insane, where he has like a 4/4, I think he has a 4/4 bass part superimposed over a 7/4 drum part, or 7/8, I don't remember what it was. So I'm talking to Bob, asking him a million questions, because he mastered all those albums. And he told me this story, and he pulled out a pair of those Neumann EQs. And he pulls out the pair of Neumann EQs, and he tells me the story of Zappa laying on a couch in front of these huge speakers. And Zappa had asked, because Zappa had golden ears. Bob was like, he could have been a mastering engineer, he could have been a film composer, he could have been anything. Zappa was just that talented. And Zappa had asked him at a specific point in the song to boost whatever frequency, but not only did he have to boost it, he had to narrow the cue, so it was super, super narrow. And so they're listening down, and Bob said that he got to the point of the song, he selects the different frequency that he has to change it from, starts to narrow the cue, but doesn't get it narrow enough for the point in the song. And he said that Zappa was laying on this couch and his arm just goes up like this. And he's like, shit. He's like, Zappa spotted it. He didn't narrow the cue enough.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear that.
No, I couldn't hear that. But
there's no way.
From what I hear about Zappa, he was everybody I know that's ever worked with him is just like Dave Jordan engineered for him for a little bit. I think he was in the interview I did with him. He said that he would call him at like 4 o'clock in the morning because he got this new piece of gear, and he's like, "You got to come over and check this out."
That's awesome.
And Dave's wife would be like, "Frank Zappa's on the phone for you."
That's a horrible phone call to get in the morning.
What do you do?
Yeah. Exactly.
But everybody said he had an amazing sense of humor, and he was like a great guy. So, yeah, huge Zappa fan.
Yeah.
So what about your speaker collections?
Well, I have, I just got these, I don't know if you say focal or focals.
I don't know either. So either of those works for me.
So I did a record earlier last year with Don, this band called Vintage Trouble.
I work with them too, yeah.
They're amazing.
Yeah, they're great.
They're a great band. But Don wanted some large speakers. I guess he had been working with someone, and they had those Barefoots, the giant, Barefoot. And we couldn't find any of those. So I got the SM9s, which are basically their giant mastering, the focal mastering ones. Loved them. Thought they were amazing sounding. And Vince King basically turned me on to these, said that these were coming out. And I have to say, it's the first set of powered speakers I've ever owned that translate well for me.
Oh, wow.
They're really good because they're three-way, but you can switch them to two-way.
Do you know what the model number is of them?
They're the Trio6 BE, I think.
Trio6 BE. Okay.
I think that's what it is. Love them.
Right.
Just love them. And then obviously NS10s because they work.
Yep.
They work. I also have a pair. I just haven't set them up yet. I have a pair of the very first model KRKs. You remember those?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a pair of those that I love.
Yeah, when I was in England, I went back to England, I think in 2000. I went to Olympic when Olympic was still there to see my friend Dave McCracken, who's a great guy, and he was working on Ian Brown's album from Stone Roses. Uh-huh. And that was being mixed by Steve Fitzmaurice,
He's amazing.
He's absolutely freaking amazing.
So good.
So good. He's scary good.
Yeah. He mixed. When I was at the Capitol, he mixed. He mixed. I think a couple of projects I worked on because I look, being a fan, I'm like, well, who mixed my favorite records? And Seal and all of this stuff, and it's this guy that nobody's using over here, and I'm like, okay, I got to try this guy.
From what I could tell, is he liked just being over in that area. He didn't seem to want to come over here. I think that was a choice. Because after he won the Grammy for, was it the Rose? What's the song called?
Kiss from a Rose.
Kiss from a Rose. That was arguably one of the best mixes I've ever heard in my entire life.
I agree.
I put it on now, 20 years later or 15 years later, and just blown away by how good it sounds.
Yeah, but again, it's Seal wrote an amazing song.
Of course.
Trevor Horn does not suck.
No, Trevor Horn's amazing. And it was mixed, I believe, on Trevor Horn's 4000, yeah.
Yeah, and then you have a guy like Steve behind the board. It's just
Okay, here's a good example, though, because so I'm in Olympic, and they're working on a Depeche Mode record. I think it was 99, 2000-ish. So they're working on this Depeche Mode record together, and they just finished Ian Brown. And Steve's Irish. He's not English, he's Irish. And so they're on, it's a beautiful console, the 1998, who Brad Wood is always freaking out about, saying it has the best mic pre's ever. So they're on a 1998. So first of all, I hadn't seen one of those. I was like, wow, what's this, And I'm in frickin' Olympic, which has like, at that point, it probably made more great records, and it's probably that and Abbey Road, So I'm there, and I look over to Steve's racks, and of course he has like 1073s, he has everything you want, but I also see he has all 888s. And so I said to him, I was like, oh wow, you use 888s. So in America, whenever I talk to people about IOs, they always tell me that 888s suck, and you need to get the apogees and this, and that, and bearing in mind that we, listening to his mixes, some of them are just the most clearest, biggest sounding mixes you've ever heard in your life. So I'm thinking in my brain's going, wait there, this guy makes these amazing sounding mixes, and yet he's using these IOs that everybody's telling me aren't good, and you need to buy this make or that make. So he looks at me firmly, like straight in the eye, and just says to me, well, that's the difference between England and America. I was like, what's the difference? He goes, in America they do it right. In England we just do it so it sounds good. Bearing in mind he's Irish. So, I think his point was, and it was after we talked, because they were using like that, remember the electric stuff with the X? You remember those 19-inch grey rack mount things that you could get? Do you remember those?
No.
And they were like envelope filters and distortion stuff. I mean, they were screwing up sounds. They were like, before it was even mixable, they'd already messed it up. There was nothing going in like pretty and nice like it does now. Everybody like prints a clean DI and a perfectly uncompressed signal. I mean, they were printing things like huge and fat and messed up. So when it came up on the console, it was like already like, wow,
Right.
They were basically committing. They were committing to a lot of stuff.
Well, that's a whole other conversation, Warren.
Yeah, it is. But his whole point was, and it's very valid, is like, getting caught up in the technical. And when you get it, all of us get into these conversations about frequency responses and curves and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, but how does it sound? Not just. I've watched people's videos where they look at they look in plugins and they look at the waveforms and say, oh look here, you see it's doing this. It's like, excuse me.
Yeah, I have to admit, I sometimes get.
We all do.
In that. I'll get caught up in like, let me see what it's looking like, because, you pull up something like with anything that's like a isotope, and it'll have like the spectral kind of thing.
Right.
And it'll say, oh, it's lacking in this frequency. And you're like, well, okay, let me see if I can make that up. And then you start going down a rabbit hole of insanity.
Yeah, I had a bad vocal the other day that had comb filtering on it because they recorded it in a small room. So it was like, there was like these low mids that were just cancelling out, and I did the same thing. I literally spent an hour analysing where all the frequencies were and boosting them back up so it looked as though it was going to sound okay, and it was probably the worst sounding vocal I ever did in my life. But it looked really good in Pro Tools on the plugins.
And it probably won't be as funny because I think you had to be there at the time, but I did a record with a band, with OK Go. I did their first record. I produced it.
Wonderful, great band.
Since it was my first major production, I was in insanity mode. So and it was Pro Tools, so I literally would sit there for 16 to 18 hours a day making everything perfect. And at one point, Damien, the lead singer, just turned to me and he said, next time we'll draw the record, it'll be quicker. So I was so obsessed with getting everything tight and lined up and pitch perfect and everything is,
One of the great things, I say this a lot, and I'll see what your take is on it. I feel like in life, especially what we do in music as engineers and producers and mixers and musicians, is understanding our quirks. One of the great things about, if you want to be a great engineer, not that that really is much to aspire to be honest anymore, because I feel like today, if you're going to be on this side of the glass, you have to be a producer, engineer, mixer, songwriter, musician. You have to have all of those things. That's what I personally think. That's the only way I make money now, is because the artist comes in, I co-write the song, not all the time, but often I co-write the song, I play most of the instruments, I produce it, I engineer, I mix it, I probably master it if they don't have the budget. You know, that's kind of the new world. And but for the engineering temperament, a lot of what we were just joking about off camera, about, you know, being a little subservient and apologizing, actually that is a good part. It's almost like you need to embrace some of those quirks. For me, it's like, to be a good engineer, and when you're doing that part of your job, you need humility. You need to not impose your ego in there. If there is a producer in the room, you have to understand that you don't have an opinion unless the producer asks you, you know.
And even then, you may not have an opinion.
Your opinion is whatever the producer's opinion is.
Well, exactly. I mean, it obviously, and you've run into these situations, it kind of depends on, number one, what your relationship is with that producer.
Yep.
But also, you know, we're engineers and producers are probably the best psychologists out there, because you're just fantastic at reading situation and knowing whether or not you're supposed to be telling the truth, basically.
Yeah.
You know, or if you're, you know, how you're supposed to deal with the dynamic between everybody hates the drummer, and the drummer's coming to you saying how much he hates the lead singer, you know, and you've got to kind of be able to deal with all of that. And obviously you can't say anything to anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you're in a studio and you're all like married to each other while you're making this record.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right, because if you're working with a singer and let's say you're 3 takes in and he or she is not getting the part, but we know they're going to get it. We know, we can hear how close they are. Now, do we go down the rabbit hole, like you were saying, using that analogy? I'm stealing your analogy. Do we go down the rabbit hole and indulge their insecurities and say, oh no, you're not getting it, and make them feel really bad about themselves and then derail the process? Or do we tell a little white lie based on the fact that we know in 3 takes they're going to get it? Right. So yeah, quite often I say to a singer, the truth. The truth is actually, you know what? You're really close and you're getting better at it. Relax, realize that you're going to, you know, and you just encourage, because it's like you watch those tensions between band members, as you're saying, and they pick up on the negativity and they feed off at each other. And our job as producers and engineers is to take the positive, because we know that ultimately we're going to get the results if we do that.
Absolutely.
Although I have worked with producers that, only a couple of producers who like to divide and conquer. They find the talent in the band, and then they just have a relationship with the singer. And then the other 3 guys and girls in the band are left out in the cold.
Yeah.
I have worked with those guys.
I think that happens more these days than it did, you know, when we were coming up, because you needed the whole band back in the day.
Right.
Now, you know, you can basically cobble together a track from whose parts, you know, and make something that sounds, you know, A-level. You know, I still kind of wonder if that's good or bad. I
want to tell you this war story and see if you have something similar. I worked with a band once. I won't say who the band is, it would be disrespectful. But I worked with this band and I spent about a week with the bass player trying to get the parts. And I actually picked up the bass and showed him the line that I wanted to do, and that actually ended up, we kept that. But anyway, so I worked with him for a week. I gave him all of the time and energy that he deserved to get the parts. And when we came back to mix the record in LA, because we were in a different state making the record, we couldn't get the bass to sound good. It just sounded hesitant, like he was trying so hard to get the right part. And so I got Scott Schreiner from Weezer came in for one day and without hearing it, recut the bass on the whole record. And of course it was amazing because it was Scott and he was digging in. He's kind of like, you know, he's a great rock bass player and a great guy, and he just brought all the energy to the parts. So we mixed the record and I didn't think anything about it. And I was in like a month later mixing a record with Tom Scott that I'd produced. And I told Tom the story. And Tom just kind of looked at me and he said, You know what? He told me he had a similar issue, I think, with Whiskey Town or something like that. One of the musicians in Whiskey Town, Ryan Adams' old band.
Wow.
And he told me that he was at a gig like 5 years later, and that musician that he had replaced came up to him and chewed him out. And what had happened is the guy had found out that he had been replaced. So his word of advice was get on the phone, call the bass player and tell him the truth. He'll be upset, but he'll respect you. And so I did that night. The first thing I did was I told the singer and the guitar player who knew what had happened. I just said, because I didn't want to throw them under the bus, I said, this is what I'm going to do. And they went, okay, we support it. So I called up the bass player, had a personal conversation with him because I produced a record, and said, dude, I'm sorry, but this is what we had to do. And he got really angry at me and was like, by the end of the conversation, he's like, you know what? I feel mixed. He's like, because I really love Weezer and I'm really happy that one of the guys in Weezer played on my record. I'm really upset that he replayed, but I'm also respect you that you told me and I didn't find out through the back door.
Right.
So I don't know, that's my little, I don't know, have you ever had anything like that?
Not quite like that. I mean, I've had things where, and it usually happens with drummers more than anything.
Sure.
Where look, there, like we alluded to earlier, you know, like with cymbals and stuff like that. It's like it's not just a get on it and bash it instrument, and there's a lot of internal kind of dynamic and internal swing that needs to happen. And a lot of times in the live situation, it's fine, but when you get things under a microscope, you hear all of that stuff. So I've had to tell drummers that you give them the shot and you do all of that, but you just got to sit them down and sit down the band and just say, at the end of the day, especially I think if you're on a major label, it's a business, and the business is to make the best sounding representation that you possibly can, because you've got to live. One of the things I always say is I have to live with this for the next 3 months or however long you're making the record. You guys have to live with this for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
So it's got to be A level. Everything has to be A level.
Yep.
And if they, if the band declines and says no, it's we got to use the band, then it's like, well, then we've got to figure out how to make, you've got to totally bring your game up, to make something happen here.
Yeah, I won't. Again, I can't talk about who the bands are, but a couple of bands we've made records with, the singer would insist on, and actually not a lot of the time it's bands, sometimes it's solo singers, and they insist on using their touring musicians, and sometimes it works, and other times it doesn't. But what I've always done, and I learned this from Dave Jerden, Dave said he, as a producer, he never imposed himself. He'd always do exactly what you're talking about. He would say, okay guys, you've got to really embrace this. And I think he told me he'd only had one record where he did replace the drummer, and I think it was on the Social D album that he did, which had that ball and chain song. It was huge. And that drummer they replaced actually ended up being the new drummer in the band. It was got that serious. He said when he came to mix it, again, the same thing, he couldn't use those drum takes. So they brought in a different drummer, and then that ended up being the new drummer. But yeah, so I completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I just want to talk about Jack Douglas for a minute, though.
No, let's talk about Jack, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm just saying he's one of my favorite, like the Cheap Trick stuff.
Yeah.
My God. I
almost feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, I almost feel like for me, production, songwriting, everything, Rob, you saw Rob and I. On Rob and I's interview, we had to cut out the first hour because all we did was talk about David Bowie for an hour.
Right.
It was ridiculous because he had just died two or a day before.
And I have to say, it's still affecting me.
Yeah, it's still affecting me. But I feel like with Americans, because you just touched on it, because I want to go on to what you were talking about, with Americans, I meet so many American musicians, producers and engineers, especially of our age group, that their favorite band and their biggest reason why they do this is Cheap Trick.
I fucking love that band.
Yeah.
I mean, I was lucky enough to co-produce a record for them. So.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I did. They have a record that's coming out, I think in a couple of months, but I did the one that was called The Latest, which came out, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago.
Wow.
That I engineered and co-produced. Yeah. I love that band.
They're pretty amazing.
The amazing songs, amazing players.
Yep.
Robin Zander is probably the greatest rock and roll voice of all time. I mean, he's up there with Freddie Mercury for me.
Freddie's my guy, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's at that level. It's like choosing between, you know, I don't know, Chris Lord and whatever, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that band. Sorry.
No. Don't apologize. I think that's a great. The thing about Cheap Trick is, for me, when you go back and rediscover, because they were not big in Europe at all. Mm-hmm. Like Kiss weren't big in Europe. When I'd grown up, I had no idea who Kiss were. You know, because we had Queen, who were huge in England, like massive. Then we had, of course, Zeppelin, and we had the Stones, and then all of the late 70s rock bands, you know, we had all that, and the new wave and punk, and they actually, of course, we had Pink Floyd and The Who. So we had all of that when I grew up, and Cheap Trick just didn't make it over, Kiss didn't make it over. But when I came over here, I realized that every musician became a musician because of Kiss, and every producer and engineer and songwriter became that because of Cheap Trick.
Yeah.
And it was like
those guys, they pulled from the MC5, they pulled from Slade, obviously pulled from the Beatles.
Totally, yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, you know, so they pulled from all of these. They're one of those bands that their influences are really heavy, but they managed to make it their own thing.
I agree.
And I think, you know, it's just beautiful. I think it's beautiful what they did. I mean, their first couple records, their first two records are amazing. And, you know, Heaven Tonight Heaven Tonight, right?
Yes, and you know, Jack saw them playing in a bowling alley and signed them to a label. Like he
I didn't know that.
Their whole story is wrapped around him. Yeah.
I didn't know that. It's just crazy for me because, you know, like Tom Peterson is one of the greatest bass players I've ever worked with.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Anybody that can play an 8-string bass, he must have fingers like.
It's crazy. It's just crazy, and I don't know. You know, everybody in that band's iconic.
Yep.
What they do, whether they're good or not, if that makes any sense.
No, it is, and I think that's, you know, we talk about this a lot with you know, there's very few bands, especially at the moment, but there's only a handful of bands where you know every member of the band.
Yeah.
And I would argue one of the last bands to do that is probably U2.
Yeah.
Where everybody has their own personality, has their own style, has their own.
Because I mean, Coldplay is probably, you know, a giant band, but I don't know anybody other than Chris Martin. It's
like him and the drummer. There's something about the way the drummer plays. I think his name's Will. That I hear a lot of chatter about the drummer. Everybody's always into, because of the modern kind of genres, a lot of rhythm-based stuff. He's the only other guy I hear a lot. Because otherwise, the guitar player is fantastic, but we all go, oh yeah, that guy that sounds like The Edge. Right, sorry to say that, you know.
No, well, I mean, in all fairness, he didn't innovate.
Yeah. And you know, I would argue somewhere in the middle is probably Radiohead. I think that any guitar player knows who Johnny Greenwood is.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, they're probably somewhere in the middle where you don't know every member of the band by name off the top of your head, but everybody knows Tom York and everybody knows Johnny Greenwood.
Well, for me, it's kind of like a Blur is kind of that kind of band as well. That's another. Whatever.
I love Blur, and one of my oldest friends in the world, Matt, has been their sound man and kind of their everything since '91.
I think they're brilliant. I think. Did
you see him live on the last tour?
I didn't see them live. No, just the music and it's just amazing. It's just amazing to me. It's out of time. It's loose. It's pitchy, but it's great.
Graham's one of my favorite modern guitar players. It's like Graham, and of course Johnny Greenwood.
Yeah.
And I always say this, and people disagree with me like crazy, but I think that the Edge, regardless of technical ability, we can throw that out the window, but as far as innovation, the Edge is probably the most influential guitar player of the last 40 years.
I would agree with you on that, actually. This is the stuff that drives me crazy about modern music, is that we have, I don't think I know how to articulate this other than to say, you have all this iconic stuff that comes before you, and we've become nothing but a blatant copy. And it's not even a good copy. A lot of it's blatant, and that's not to say, look, there's tons of great, amazing music being made. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it's a lot of copy. It's a lot of standing on the shoulders of giants, but not understanding the depth that the giants had to go to.
Yeah, I think I talked about this with Rob, so I apologize if I'm repeating this again to anybody who's watching, but Charlie Gillett wrote a book called The Sound of the City. You ever read that?
Huh? No, I haven't.
He's Scottish, and I believe he's Scottish. He told, well, anyway, he basically, what he did is he said that Black Sabbath, Jeff Beck Group, John Mayall, and Led Zeppelin, all of those mid-late 60s rock bands, listened to the blues to create rock. Aerosmith, and the Yardbirds, obviously, and Aerosmith listened to the Yardbirds and Led Zeppelin and John Mayall's and the Blues Breakers album of Eric Clapton and Black Sabbath, and created their version. He said the problem is that Motley Crue listened to Aerosmith.
Right.
And then modern rock bands listen to Motley Crue, and then you get the point. It's like,
yeah,
it's not. There's nothing. It's not about being judgmental in that sense. It's just that it's just a fact. It's like those guys were listening to Robert Johnson and creating unique sounding music because they were going back to the source, and it becomes his whole argument is rock and roll is incestuous. And it just feeds off itself, and what it should be doing is finding out where it came from.
You know, Bowie, when there was a quote that I found. Cameron Crowe did an interview with Bowie, and he asked Bowie, like, would he consider himself an original thinker? And Bowie's response to that was, I'm paraphrasing a bit. He said he's more like a tasteful thief.
I like that.
And the reality is, I mean, if you listen to Bowie, you know, he pulled from like big band to cabaret to, you know, obviously new wave. He pulled from all of this stuff and created, you know, he created David Bowie for fuck's sake.
Yeah.
You know, he created these things that there's a reason why we look at it and say that's great. You know, even his lesser stuff, you know, if you don't like the Tin Man stuff or Tin Machine, stuff, it's still really interesting. Yeah,
it's fantastic. No, I couldn't agree more. The thing about Bowie is he didn't do anything other than for the art, and I really strongly believe that. You know, when he did Fame, which is crossover 73, 74, he cuts his hair short, he goes and hires the best musicians he could find, and they all just happen to be black musicians. He didn't go, I'm making a political statement. He just he just always found the best players, and it doesn't matter where it came from, and he was always trying, he was taking the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed, he was taking Iggy, bands that were around in the late 60s that got ignored, especially in America. He's taken them, and it was already 4 or 5 year out of date music, but he was bringing it to the masses.
Yeah.
You know, when The Idiot came out, that was 77. Iggy Pop had already had a 10-year career, but he was introducing Iggy Pop to the world. You know, Raw Power had sold like 40,000 copies or whatever it was, and then suddenly Iggy Pop has a top 10 album, is writing songs like China Girl and Night Clubbing, all these incredible songs, and The Passenger. And these are some of the best crossover songs of all time. Coming out in 77, they're like punk and new wave, and I love it. And the motivation was just the art. Right.
And I'm not, you know, I don't want to turn it into a Bowie love fest because
it's okay.
No, because I don't, you know, I think if people watch this, you know, it's just two middle-aged men talking about David Bowie again, but it's not. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I think that there are bands out there now that still go deep. They're just not going deep enough.
I agree.
If that's the best
I
I can
think
say. It's like listening to country music and saying Brad Paisley is the epitome of country music without understanding that there was the Carter family.
when I've worked with the hipper bands, notice I said hipper, not hipster. When I've worked with the hipper bands, one of the things I've run into is whenever we work on a song, whether we've co-written it or whether they write it themselves, I hear this word too much. It's too pop.
Ugh. Yeah.
It drives me nuts. It's like
it's stupid.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. Yeah.
It's like put on Life on Mars. It's a god-awful small affair with the girl with the mouse. Or put on The Passenger. Let's get away from Bowie. Put on The Passenger. Put on a Velvet Underground song. You know, Sweet Jane. They're popular songs. They're hooky songs.
Because I'm sure you've gotten it too, where you've done a mix for somebody and they come back and say, "Oh, it sounds too good. It doesn't sound indie enough."
Oh my God.
And you're like, "Well, isn't that the point? It's supposed to sound good." I mean, the Beatles, Bowie, all of our favorite anybody doesn't. You want to be popular. It's called pop music for a reason.
It's popular, yeah.
Yeah, it's called pop music for a reason. You know, it goes back to radio and all of that. Formats changing, that the taste, the palate isn't there anymore. I mean, you know, it's just not there for kids anymore. They can consume so much, but they don't know. There's no gatekeeper. It's such a weird topic, but there's no gatekeeper to kind of say, this is kind of like if you like this, then you should really check out this.
Sure.
Other than, you know, some stupid iTunes algorithm saying if you listen to Beyonce, then you're gonna like Rihanna, and that's not the same.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I agree. I think that whenever I have these conversations with artists, I always ask them who their favorite bands are, obviously, and try and get down to where they're coming from. Yeah. Then I ask them whose career they want, and they all want like The Cure, and I go, well, The Cure wrote Love Cats, right. Or they wrote Lullaby. They wrote these songs that you can sing along with, and they have like hooky melodies and great guitar parts and like things. You know, you have or even Joy Division. Yeah. Where would we be without Love Will Tear Us Apart? Or New Order, obviously, you have like 20 top 10 singles. It's like, you can do it all. You can have a song that's memorable, you can have incredible, interesting production, and you can also still be credible. It is possible. And I think that's what I'm trying to encourage, and it sounds like you're trying to encourage as well. Yeah. It's just difficult because I suppose a lot of artists unfortunately care about what their peers think. They'll go to a party and they want their other peers to go, dude, you're really cool, bro. I like it, you know.
Well, it's an image thing, right?
It's an image thing, yeah.
You know, if your thing is your favorite band's Radiohead, then the idea is to emulate Radiohead. Right. It's not even to surpass Radiohead. It's just to be just as good. And how boring is that? Yeah,
but you know, if you had Tom York in the room, you would say, why do you have a career? And he said, because I have a top 10 single called Creep.
Exactly.
Which is a great song, but it sounds like a grunge song from the mid-90s, which is what it was.
Right.
So they were just doing what was popular. Now, I don't know if it was deliberate or not. I doubt if it was. It's just what they did. I mean, I love Blur, but the reason why most people know about Blur in America is because of song number 1 or number 2, what it was called, you know, which was another grungy style anthem. And now, obviously, coming from England, I'd already had Modern Life is Rubbish in the first album and just thought they were the greatest band. And all my peers, we all loved Blur, and we wanted to be Blur because they were a mixture of 60s pop with late 70s and early 80s punk and new wave. And we loved them because all their influences were so obvious. And we loved that about them. But, you know, they introduced themselves to America by having a grungy style song. And to not be aware of that is foolish. You know, we have to understand, you know, how people get to hear about your band. But I don't think it's selling out. I think it's just making music that people. You know, Pink Floyd. It's a different world, you know. And I would argue the same for Bob Dylan. You know, Bob Dylan wrote "It Ain't Me, Babe" in 65 or 66. One of the best songs of all time. Makes my top 10 favorite songs ever. You know, it ain't me, babe. You know, go away from my window, leave at your own chosen speed. I mean, the lyrics are amazing. The melody is amazing. If one of the biggest country stars in the world decided to cover that at a moment, it would be a top 10 single.
Yeah,
it's
I agree. Yeah.
Or Just Like a Woman. She breaks just like a little girl. After he's talking about how tough she is, you know, and then she breaks just like a little. I mean, I pray to write a song that good.
Yeah.
So it's tough. It's like, you know, every singer-songwriter that wants to be Bob Dylan will go back and realize that he wrote Times Are Changing, hit everything, hit great lyric, great melody, 3.5-minute song, you know, with no key changes, nothing trying to be artsy, just wrote this amazing song, and do that, and then build off that. So.
And then build off that. I think, you know, a lot of it comes down to is there's like this inability for people to have patience with their own career.
Right.
So they can't, like, if it doesn't happen now, you know, if you're not getting the hit and the constant, everybody saying you're great, then obviously you're not. And you and I and all the great artists know, you know, it takes a long time. Yeah,
we have to continually adapt and continually just evolve, yes. And again, the two middle-aged men talking about David Bowie. David Bowie had, I want to say, 3 or 4 record deals before he got successful.
Yeah, I mean, the Beatles were passed on.
Yeah, by everybody.
Everybody's been passed on.
Everybody great has been passed on, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Sinatra was, you know, left labels and all, you know, it's just, it's
Queen. Look at Queen's story. They couldn't get arrested. They were in these production deals with these studios and getting ripped off, and they wrote Death on Two Legs about their old manager who ripped them off. I mean, Aerosmith, anybody who's an Aerosmith fan will know how badly they were ripped off. What's his name? American piano player, really obvious. Billy Joel, completely ripped off by people. I'm not saying you have to be ripped off to be successful. I'm just saying that's what happened to some of the best artists, and they had to go through so many challenges to come out the other side and be successful. And it's unfortunate that that's what the business can be like, but it shows that, yes, it's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually, I mean, you know, I don't wish anybody to have hard times.
God, no.
That's part of the beauty of it, though, is like, it's like going into it, for me, it's like going into a studio, you know, and you just see that mess of cable.
Right.
You know? It's just like, you know that something great is going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, you have 60 microphones all over the place, and somehow it manages to make its way down into this 3-minute piece of art that could or could not live forever. And
Wonderful.
that's kind of the beauty of it, the crapshoot of it.
I'd love to come out to your place there and film you in the studio. Maybe talk about how you record stuff. I think that could be a lot of fun.
Anytime.
Well, I got it on camera.
Yeah, I actually love this type of stuff.
Yeah, me too.
I'm a slut for going online and looking and watching videos and all of that.
Wonderful.
Just love it.
Well, Connor and I have been threatening to go out to Nashville and spend a week out there. It could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, you could come up to Ocean Way or Blackbird or.
I love Blackbird. Yeah.
Such a great studio.
All right, I'm going to wrap up. Connor's going to have his work cut out editing this together, making some sense out of my rambling.
I feel like we didn't talk about anything that you would want to talk about, but
no, I think we talked about everything that people want to talk about. Trust me, it's part of the modern industry, and I really want to help people out because I feel like I've got a couple of guys that follow me that are middle class producers and engineers and are making a really good living that nobody's heard of. They have no major credits, and I know that there is a business out there for people doing this. I really do. You can be in Wisconsin. You can be like one of the guys that follows me in Kentucky and make really good upper middle class wages now.
Yep.
And it's getting past some of the technical, understanding the gear, and I really want to help people push them. I want to push them in the right directions. People ask me the right questions all the time, and that's fantastic. And getting back to what you were saying, I want to get people away from like buying and selling middling equipment and maybe cherry picking a couple of nice pieces of equipment that can really, really help them. So We could do tons of videos on this subject. I'll let you go. Thank you ever so much for this. I really appreciate it. So
Anytime more.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody for watching. I really appreciate it. If you got to the end of the video, I appreciate your patience. And as ever, please subscribe. Go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list, and have a marvelous time recording and mixing.